Dr. Power, your guests have arrived.
Oh, thank you, Bonnycastle. Hi, folks. Come on in. Bonnycastle, bring me another sherry when you get a minute, please. Thank you. Well, we are. This is week number 5, and moving along. A number of you are calling, saying hello. I appreciate that. I do enjoy chatting with you and getting some sense of what's going on in your life. It's extremely busy. Sandy and I have been asked to take over another master's program where the instructor decided to stop partway through the program. So Sandy's agreed to join me on that, and we have to do it or we have to cancel that course and let them start fresh, and we don't want to do that either. So it's increasing the tempo and the workload around here, but we're loving it and having some fun, and hopefully you are too. The exam, I'm going to start mentioning more and more to get you ready to bring the pressure down, the temperature level. The exam will be in 2 parts. Part B, which is the easiest, will be a case study analysis, like the case study that you're doing for me in 2 weeks' time. You're going to put it in. And it'll be the similar fashion, but I'm going to give you the case 3 or 4 days ahead of time, probably the Monday of the last week. You'll have it. You'll have a chance to talk to your team members, ask what questions that old fart's going to ask us. There'll be similar questions that you've been doing on all the practice cases and your individual assignment case that you're doing for 2 weeks down the road. So there's no surprises there. It's worth 50% of the marks, and I can't imagine anybody who has turned their mind to the case, read it ahead of time, and jotted some thoughts down and thought what tools you might want to use will have any difficulty with it. That will not be a problem. On the first part, A, 5 or 6 questions, short little questions, 10 marks each, probably would not take more than 3/4 of a page to respond to, and they're high level, they're global. There are things like no man is an island, discuss. And on first blush, you may not be able to think of anything, but upon reflection and taking this course, I hope it comes across that no man is an island, that we're interconnected economically with America, spiderweb, tug on one, tugs on the other, the ISIS thing that's going on with our folks in Afghanistan. And so all the answers will be different. And what I'm looking for you is to make a connection in the context of the materials we cover in the course and in the discussion sites that truly no man is an island. Or it may be a quote from Porter. A company without a strategy is like a ship without a rudder. Discuss. So my point is, it's not about memorizing something on page 69. Rather, it's about some reflective thought for a few minutes and bringing back in that deep learning that's taken place over the 8 weeks into the questions. So my message to you is there's nothing to be concerned about with respect to the exam. It's well structured. I've been doing this for quite a number of years, and I'm comfortable that every one of you will have little difficulty in getting through the course, and some of you do extremely well. So that's the story on that. I'm doing what I can as the team assignments have come in. I'm now getting ready to mark those, and I'll do my very best to get them back to you before you get your individual assignments in a number of days' time. Now let's go on to today's paper. Of course, the big story today in the paper, of course, and this is a Wednesday, was last night's election. We've probably already discussed it a bit towards the end of this week and this session, but certainly the interest to us is what difference will it make to Canada, to the Keystone Pipeline, etc. What difference will it make to the globe? Because Obama requires, has this pen and a phone he talked about, and he can veto every bill that comes up from the Republicans. He can say nope, and nothing happens. It'll be a dead stick. And he needs 2/3 of the vote from the Senate, where he doesn't get to use the pen to veto it. It will go through. And there's a whole bunch of bills that the Republicans have passed in their House and have sent up to the old House of Democrats and have been sitting there on the order paper but never submitted to the President for approval or disapproval. There's a whole backlog of bills, and I expect early on we'll see a number of other bills coming in to get some clarification, and one might well be the Keystone Pipeline to get that moving. So we'll watch for that to see what difference it makes, but certainly it seems to me that we're in a dangerous position when America, the driving engine of the globe, America with up to $200 trillion worth of contingent liabilities, and part of that is 18 in the current debt. It's troubling for all of us. We have to watch carefully and hope that things go well over the next 2 years. But if the ship is adrift, if it's frozen in reaction stage only, because they have a number of things to do to improve their debt ceiling, etc. These meetings will be coming up, and there'll be lots of consultation going on. That's going to impact on the strength of America globally, and as they do that, others will come around like an animal that's wounded, and we will see other nations like China, the BRIC, as part of the BRIC nations, and South American countries and others that think it's time for a change on the center of the world stage and who's supposed to be there, and vehicle currencies and stuff we've talked about in this class. But it's certainly, as the Chinese say, interesting times, and something we all need to watch and make some comments on. So let's draw some conclusions as to what difference the election outcome might mean to Canada specifically, and you in crafting your strategies. Is there anything you can do to prepare for that? I see in here that the security agencies, particularly CSIS and others, RCMP, didn't spend all their budget last year. They've been encouraged by the government, conservative government, to be frugal with their money, and so they've ended up with a bit of a surplus to comply with the government's moral suasion and wishes. But then the question becomes that because they haven't spent their total envelope, the Canadian securities may be diminished. And a hot button for me, of course, is where we're spending that money. And I'm not even sure we can, but certainly Canada's North needs some security money spent on it, and we do very little 180 degrees away from the 49th parallel. And as a result of that, other nations are taking strips off us up there, and it's time to spend a little money up in the north. I see here that the oncologists in the BC Cancer Agency have filed complaints to the provincial health authorities, suggesting that the organization's in disarray. It lacks leadership. There's been revolving chairs there as to the CEOs and leaders. And from our perspective, from a business perspective, it's interesting to note that could you make a difference now when you finish up this course? Could you go in there and sort that out? Certainly they're saying that the strategy seems to be there, but there's no implementation, there's no leadership. And so the story is interesting, of course, but what we draw out of that is what sort of leadership could make a difference in that organization, and how do you lead professionals? Certainly what organizational structure would you use for that? And certainly the military model or the bureaucratic model of master-servant, very high structured organizations probably will not work amongst a bunch of oncologists. So how do you lead these folks from behind and make this all happen? And so right now, in economic terms, there's an efficiency curve that goes out like this and comes down, and the more efficient you are, the closer you get to this experience curve out here. And the problem for these folks is they're well within the bubble, within the experience curve, and they're not maximizing the resources they have to push the frontier back out to this experience curve frontier. And so it's a nice challenge for strategists to look at something like this and say, could I fix that? And I think as this course unfolds, you'd have some very positive suggestions to make. Well, our military is doing its thing over not in Syria, which is good for us, but there are 40 nations over there whapping away at Syria and Iraq. And we've talked already a bit about this. We've got 6 CF-18s, we've got 2 140s over there, and one other large refueling thing, that thing where the straw comes out of the nose. So we've got a fair deployment, a fair representation. And we make a lot out of the sorties that's taken place so far. I forget the numbers, about 18 sorties so far, and this is Wednesday. There's probably more by the time you see this video. And we're primarily bombing tractors and bulldozers and dump trucks. And obviously there's some collateral damage and some folks that are hit by this. We don't give the actual numbers because we don't want to relate that it was sortie number 16 killed these 5 people for obvious reasons. But I had to talk about this briefly on the site. I think it was Tyler, and Tyler, thank you for that. Tyler's got some insight and gave some very good information from a military perspective on it's not as simple as just a bulldozer. The bulldozer may have certain things, in this case, of diverting the Euphrates River to flood all of Baghdad. I mean, that's a possibility. But my concern is at a higher level, when we zoom out for a few minutes, is the number of dollars. The Americans have spent over $3 trillion so far on these Middle Eastern conflicts. And there comes a point that you spend your global resources, your assets, and find yourself weakened and hemorrhaged. And then people like China that are smiling, sitting there saying, go ahead and spend, are growing stronger hourly. India is growing stronger hourly with their blue water navies. It's troubling to say, are we getting bang for the buck? That I mean, what's the cost for us to take one of our laser-guided bombs and bomb a backhoe or a 640 loader or a something of that nature against the price of the bomb and all the other infrastructure? And so we can spend ourselves out, and that's exactly what ISIS wants us to do, is to hemorrhage and spend our resources. And so I think we need to think carefully at what we're throwing at this thing, because at a certain point in time, you'll turn around, there'll be no more ammunition to fire at them. And certainly the Chinese now are cutting back on what they're prepared to loan us for treasury bills. it's a topic we could discuss a little bit further, again, about what we're doing over there and does it make sense, and expending our political capital and our goodwill around the world. It certainly is an issue that I think deserves talk. This was interesting. It was the minister of, and I forget what, in the Harper government. In any event, it slipped out that they wanted to change the name of the Champlain Bridge to the Rocket Richards Bridge. And of course, I certainly remember the Rocket. He was fabulous, as was his younger brother, and Boom Boom Geoffrion, and those folks that used to watch the hockey. Well, we only had 6 hockey teams. I knew them all. Loved the games. And certainly he deserves it. He's a consummate Canadian, French Canadian, well-liked, humble man. Certainly deserves recognition. But I'm not sure we should get rid of the Champlain came to here in 1604. Port Royal, Nova Scotia, sets up one of the initial founders of Canada. And so there's a lot of flack going back and forth on this, and I think they've withdrawn the idea of renaming the bridge and leave it as it is at the Champlain. But we could talk a bit about that, renaming the bridge. Story in here about Ottawa is going to restore health care for selected refugee applicants. And Canada's a caring nation, and certainly if refugees come here, and certainly I guess there's classifications of refugees. If some come for fear of their person and they come through the proper channels, and the mom, the dad, the child is sick, I think all Canadians say we have to do something about it. However, if they're like the States, where they got 50 million, I underscore that word, 50 million illegals who have come into the country, more of recent date with respect to Mexico and South American and children, youngsters, their social safety net can't accommodate 50 million new, even though Obama likes these folks for voting basis, because the non-residents can vote in the States in their election. It's a concern. So we have to watch this, find the appropriate balance. So my question for you here is with respect to illegals, my question to you today is with respect to refugees who have come through properly, what is Canada's position? Are we doing the right thing to open the door for healthcare services that you and I pay for? Or should we be a little more restrictive and more penny wise in how we dole out these very scarce resources? We could do that. I see Sellinger in the Premier is having some trouble in Manitoba. Fired 5 of his cabinet ministers, I think it was yesterday, and they were senior cabinet ministers, replaced them. But the sense is that he's gone so far, he's done himself such damage that I think it's that Icarus factor. He's flown too close to the sun, the wings are falling off. I think he's going to have little choice between now and the next election, which is 2 years out, I believe. Sometime in the next 24 months, I think we'll see a leadership convention in Manitoba, and you'll have a little choice but to stand aside. And maybe one of those 5, to include their finance minister, may come back and take a run at the leadership. But anyway, let's talk about Manitoba and the need for cabinet to be controlled. It's interesting thoughts. What else have I got in here today? Yeah, well, it's going through. We just finished up with Bonnycastle a few minutes ago, a new video where I took the simple multi-attribute rating technique, that SMART model that we've talked about in class, and indeed, anytime you make a decision, you need a decision criteria matrix, which the SMART model serves that purpose nicely, where you put the options and choices or recommendations across the top and the variables down the side. Some are key success factors, other very important attributes, and they do some sort of weighted analysis. And how do you migrate that data over to a strategic group map? Well, the good news is we just finished another strategic thinking concept video. It's about 18 minutes long, and it explains exactly how to do one of those and how to migrate the data over, and gives you a list of axes that you might suggest that you could use. So have a look at that. I'll try to get it out to you in the next day or two, so if you have time. It's not part of the course, you don't have to, but if you want to look at it, it's there for you as a bonus. What else do we have in here going through? Oh yeah, we're still fine. We've talked the last 3 weeks about the credit card industry voluntarily trying to take the heat off, to step forward and say, okay, let's prune the tree a little, let's cut back on our fees that we charge merchants and our fees that we charge individuals, and see if we can get a little more in line. Because if you don't, then I think Consumer Affairs, federal government's going to bring some more draconian law in to make them comply. And so they have backed up a whole 10 percentage points is the way it's finally unfolded, rolled it back by 10%. And some of the shops that first to comment on that say, well, that's insignificant. it won't really be passed on to the consumer. The consumer will hardly feel that 10% rollback in the price of goods and services, and they're looking for far more. But the interesting thing in here we're talking about was the using Porter's five forces and the rivals and the competition. Increasingly, we're seeing Bitcoins and the Apple iPay and PayPal and these new alternate ways of paying for your goods because of the Internet of Things and technology are growing rapidly. And I think they're going to start eating the cake of the conventional bank's credit cards. So we can watch for that and see what difference it would make, and maybe even hop on the bandwagon as an investment if you think there's merit in that as we do it. There's talk in here once again about the oil prices coming down, which is interesting. I had somewhere, I'll leave that for a second, maybe in my next piece of paper, which is worth looking at. Yeah, there's another question here. This is on, again, we're talking about we're talking about this revolt in Manitoba. And aside from that, it occurred to me something we should talk about, because we get really confused on this. When you elect a representative to go to the House, does that individual believe that they are supposed to vote the bills and represent and speak for you? Or is the other alternative that you've hired them for the 4 or the 5 year term, and they're on a frolic of their own? They can do whatever, vote any way they want, and indeed, often they're co-opted as backbenchers to sit quietly and have little or no voice, and only those that get selected to the inner sanctum to the cabinet have a voice. And the question becomes, do they speak for you in cabinet, or do they still speak in accordance with the wishes of the Prime Minister's office, which is not in the British North America Act or not in the Constitution, but it is taking control of Canada, and the PMO's office is really a very strong force within the directing minds of Canada and what you and I are going to experience as citizens. So today we could talk about representatives. The elections going up in municipalities all over this province. Are those folks elected to speak for you, or are they there to do what they think is right for the next 4 years without regard to you? And if you don't like them, you fire them at the end of the term. Make an interesting bit of a dialogue, but we should understand that. South Korea kids, wow, this is... South Korea is leading on technology in my mind, on the Internet of Things. They're far out in front. Stem cell research, they're doing everything and doing it right, and they've come a long way as a small nation. They really punch above their weight globally. And it says in here, South Korean children are the least happiest in a study among developed countries. And they looked at 30 countries, and they came out number 1 as being the most unhappy place for kids, certainly not Disneyland. And long work, etc., and they focus on competition and where they place. They're very focused, and that's that tiger mum syndrome we've talked about. And what's the balance there? Do you believe in this, the need for engineers and technology advancement, how important it is that we have a workforce? Again, Porter talks about why nations are competitive, and one of the things he talks about are factor endowments, both basic and advanced. And this would be advanced factor endowment, the idea of education of a workforce, people like these youngsters being trained and put through it almost to the breaking point. But at the end of the day, the engine for South Korea is this brain power. It's driving that little nation ahead. And in Canada, I think we talked last week, innovation-wise, we're no longer even in the top 20. We're falling by the wayside. We're less productive, less innovative, and maybe need more tiger mums in Canada. How's that for a question this week? Do we need more tiger mums in Canada? What else have we got here? Let's see, report on business. Oh, wow. This irritates me. This is a whole section on MBAs, and we have pushed hard for here. Wharton certainly is well out in front with almost 7 million people taking this mass open online courses that open for the globe. We've talked a bit about it in the course before, and more power to them. I think that the whole educational system, particularly what you and I are doing here today of bricks and mortars and doing our best to harness technology, Internet of Things coming, I think we need to reset the whole educational system a little bit. And here we see in here that they're not just MOOCs, but they're now 2 or 3 of the leading schools have developed a mini MBA. And you know what you're paying for yours, but here's a new MBA from Schultz, which is one of the best management schools in Canada, and they have a mini MBA that you can get for $9,250. $9,250, where they sort of pack the critical must-knows down and the strategy and some of those basic things you need, and they go out with minis, and the well-attended students are signing up for it, and it certainly conflicts with the with the older models for doing things. And so let's talk this week about how relevant is the MBA here at Royal Roads, and could we do more to do a transformational shift to adopt this new Internet of Things, this new technology, even more than we're doing, to get back out in front on, and do you believe in the mini MBA? Do you think that would have merit? Have a chance to investigate it, see what you think. One final thing here I see in school is the idea of cell phones get a weak reception in classrooms, and I have to confess at times so do the laptops, because in my class I try to have Socratic dialogue, like we're doing here, but except you have a chance to talk with me, and we exchange views, and it's a fast-moving class, and nothing slows down that progress quicker than somebody who's reading, for whatever reason, their iPad or their laptop or their cell phone to say, whoops, I didn't hear the question, and everything just slows right down. So it's trying to find that appropriate balance in a classroom, whether we should use those things. I'm sure you have the same thing in your workplace. To what extent should those be used if you're trying to have a dialogue, a conversation? Indeed, you know, that's one of the things. We're the most connected generation ever. Most connected ever. You've got all those little tools and widgets, and now we're going to have smart watches and smart glasses and everything else, but yet we're the most disconnected. When's the last time you sat with your family for a family Sunday dinner, or took the afternoon just to be with them, with the stores open? Things have shifted so dramatically from when I was a youngster where stores were closed. You had a family Sunday dinner, you went to church on Sunday mornings, and you spent the day with the family. We talked about things. Today we're zooming in and out, less of television and more on your iPads and laptops, but nevertheless we're not having conversations anymore with each other. We're having these short little conversations with other people, and even then they're not, in my mind, not meaningful conversations like we have on the discussion site. The short little, what was it, 127 words or something like that. They're letters that you respond with. Let's talk this week a bit about the most connected generation, or are we? So what else we got here? Merchants. Scotiabank is cutting back, and they redesigned their strategy last year, a big move forward. And you recall that in our world we talk about first you craft your strategy, then you craft your structure to fit that strategy, where you want to be a big sumo wrestler, you want to be an agile little rabbit, a speed runner. And once you get your strategy and you adopt the structure to align with and support that strategy, the next step generally is to get your systems in place, and that's how do you control the bones of the strategy, the nervous system, the dashboards and things to get it moving. And so anyway, Scotiabank has got a strategy and seems to be having taken effect. They're now getting the structure right, and with that comes 1,500 jobs cut in Canada to get that aligned. And 1,500 jobs is a significant cut to good paying jobs in Canada. But it goes the need to that prune the rosebush stuff we've talked about, that we need to cut the suckers off. And clearly the new CEO and the directing minds of Bank of Nova Scotia have said we'll cut 1,500 jobs off and let those resources go back into the main branch, the stem of the rosebush, to grow new product lines or whatever it happens to be. And so again, it's interesting as strategists to watch what's happening with Scotiabank and see if you agree or disagree with the move. Amazon, same-day service in Vancouver and Toronto, just implemented in time for Christmas. That's a giant step. Walmart's been doing that the best they can as they go through it, but they think this will give Amazon the pole position by getting into this business, and it's certainly emerging through the fog should cause some consternation, it seems to me, for Canada Post. What will Canada Post be doing on its parcel delivery when companies like Walmart and Amazon can get you there in the same day? And it's free service, in many parts, free service. What's that speak to Canada Post? They must be hemorrhaging. Fun to see. Let's look at that if we can today. Another one is WestJet slims down its seats on its 737 fleet. And I have to confess, I've shrunk 2 years since I was a youngster. I'm now down to 6 foot, but I still weigh 220 pounds. I'm a relatively big man, always have been a big man. And when you put me in those small, funny little seats for long, extended flights, knees up against one end and somebody puts the seat back on the other end, it's dangerous to your health. I mean, legs and getting up and whatever, and more so these days that you can't walk around and move as much as we used to be able to. So do you agree with this idea of the WestJets and others slimming down the size? And if they get away with this, although they haven't put it in, it's incremental, that it's the Chinese drip method, I wouldn't be surprised to see if their next step is not to add another whole row, because they've now made the seats narrower for a purpose. And so it's not to widen the aisle anymore, it is to put another row of seats in. And so even though they don't admit it now, I think that's what's coming down the pipe at us. But let's have a talk about slim down seats and WestJet and the need for profits, because the airline industry is one of the most competitive, but certainly with the price of fuel falling, 25% of the bottom line, they may be able to do a little better than cut back on the seats. Prentice is interesting. Premier Jim Prentice from Alberta, we've been talking about this and the collapse of the oil price and what it all has, but certainly the issue out there is the pressure on the province because of climate change. The need to do something about the oil sands, etc., to accommodate the carbon taxes and things that Gore and the boys have put in. And so the question becomes, to what extent should Canada comply with the carbon tax credits and the reducing emissions? And I certainly read and I hear them say, and the UN says, and experts say, but equally I can find experts on the other side that say, stop, on the balance of things, I don't think we're going to make a big difference. I know this is heresy to a lot of you, but let's have that discussion. I don't believe that the case is in yet to satisfy me that climate change is caused by fossil fuels solely. Certainly if you take a core sample of ice and go back 10 million years, you'll find, in fact, where I'm sitting now in Victoria was once covered by ice, climate change. And certainly nobody around at that time cooking with coal, to my knowledge, but may have been another civilization. But my point is that the other day I found a site that had 3,100 scientists who also signed a document saying we think this is not on, this is some sort of a scam for Gore and the bunch to be gouging this way. In any event, Canada is so minuscule on the site compared to the coal emission things in China and other places. And so I simply raised that as a no wrong or right answers, just for a dialogue, but in this whole class it's about getting the evidence, putting it on the table, sifting it, and if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong, but show me the evidence. But at this point I'm still not convinced, but let's have that dialogue and make a fun discussion, and at the end of the day, as long as you understand the terrain you're standing on, the evidence you believe, then you're right. But as thoughtful people, let's have a reflective thought on this, let's come to our own conclusions and not be overly influenced by the biases, etc., without understanding the motivation behind the documents such as Gore's document on the truth, etc. So let's have a look at those, and that should be an interesting little conversation this week in class. But no wrong, right answers. Whatever you say is fine. I notice here we talked about Canada being a petrocurrency, and it's got a two charts here between the price of West Texas fuel and the price of the loonie. And they're exactly, I guess I could show you if you can see it or not, but the chart is exactly the same. And what we conclude out of that, of course, is that as the oil price drops, and forecast it will continue to drop yet, when we had this conversation a couple weeks back, it was in the low 80s. Yesterday it reached $77.19 US, so it's dropped about $5 in the last 2 weeks since we started to discuss this. And it will continue to drop, in my humble opinion, to close to the high 60s, low 70s. And if that's true, we can expect increasing downward pressure on the loonie, which will help some of our manufacturing industry, but could be a disaster, will be a disaster for the oil industry in Canada, and we should look at that. In fact, there's an interesting little tidbit just at the bottom of the page here, talking about the Bank of Canada, and it said it would likely prefer to see a lower interest rate than see the dollar go down further. And that's interesting, because that's just a little tidbit at the bottom of a page. And we talked last week about, I think it was Norway's interest rates going to zero. No, it was Sweden's rates. Sweden's rates were going down to zero. And there's a possibility that Canada's interest rates could drop lower than they are now, which are exceptionally all-time low. But again, what difference would it make if our rates did drop down? We could look at that. Our exports have moved up marginally because of energy and auto sales. And their automobile industry, and that, again, I think directly related to the dollar, that they can buy our products out of Toronto cheaper, and so it increases the number of cars we can sell because the dollar's worth less than the American dollar. And so that's a good thing, and we've talked already about the hemorrhaging of our automobile industry going south into Mexico, because we can't compete with the Mexicans. They're really taking the pole position, as they are taking some from Americans, but more for us. You only have to go to Windsor to get some sense of what we're doing. article in here about migration, Vancouver. The shift generally has been in the past to Alberta. More immigrants go to Alberta because of the oil and the opportunities. But just of recent date, there's a bit of a slowdown in Alberta and more coming into BC, and particularly the large areas like Vancouver. And that will impact what we talked about last year, the housing, but it will not impact on those $2 million or $20 million penthouses we talked about last week, but it will impact on the suburbs of Vancouver, where people can afford to live, out to Abbotsford and places like that. And so the real estate industry out there stands to gain. The price of homes may actually go up because of the shift in migration. This is a fabulous story. I think we talked about it briefly, but it's all coming to pass now, that China has reached an agreement with Canada to set up a currency exchange in Canada. And for a while it was talked about in Vancouver, as that's a center and a very large population base, as well as it's a Pacific Rim province for moving goods and services back and forth. And we talk about gas and oil, which we have part and Alberta has part. And so there's an argument to say that should be centered here. But I think we're losing that battle. I think it's going to Toronto, as that will be the fiscal hub for this new currency. Well, we can't change that. That'll be a decision made by President Harper, Prime Minister, forwarding the slip, by Prime Minister Harper and the Chinese. But basically what they're able to do is you can now take, if you want to, buy BC gas, LNG, and ship it in containers to China. You don't have to go through that exchange process of buying American first to pay the bills and then converting it over to the yuan. You can go directly into the bank and say, just like you do now for American dollars, give me Chinese currency, and you can do a free exchange. And in fact, the Chinese have said that if you actually want to buy some of our projects and pay for it in this currency, we'll give you a 2 or 3% discount, which is extremely attractive. But what we're seeing in that, if we zoom back out for a few minutes, is that demand-supply curve for the American dollar. This is just another death bang against the demand-supply curve, that's less of a demand for the US dollar to pay for these goods and services to China, which is one of the largest in the world, and Toronto will be the hub for North America for your currencies. And so we expect to see a lot of, certainly Canadian companies, exploiting this opportunity for 2 or 3% saving, as well as the savings on the conversion fees to get American dollars first, which is considerable, for paying for oil and gas and one thing or another. So we can have a look at that today about the Chinese move, and then peel the onion a little bit. I mean, it doesn't come without strings. The strings may not be apparent, but what we're seeing with the great growth in gold holdings by China over the last 18 months, 2 years, they're buying everything that moves in gold and getting rid of the funny money, the treasury bills, and dumping and buying hard assets and buying interest in the oil sands and buying the Caribbean and buying the Gold Coast in South America and in Western Australia and helping Norway get itself out. They're getting rid of the funny paper and buying hard assets and positioning themselves, and this is just another position to make its currency stronger with the gold backing as a vehicle currency or as a part of the basket of vehicle currencies for the inevitable adjustment in the US dollar. So stuff we could talk about there is pretty big. Talisman, talking about breakdowns in the North Sea, Talisman Energy has been interesting. Certainly the last 3 or 4 years, they've had a real rough time in their management and their implementing strategies, and the stock has been under severe pressure. And it's a stock we should be watching to see, from a business perspective, how they manage and how they try to bring this thing around. Worth the story, worth a few moments of examination. Well, this is something on well, let me, the two stories fit together. Yeah, Pelosi, he's the Bank of Canada's governor, came out and he actually suggested, and I think he's crazy, actually suggested that young people ought to consider unpaid work to gain job experience. Wow, that just set me right on my heels for a few minutes. And the story goes on to continue about all that. And Canadian youth unemployment right now is 13.5%. And remember that number, 13.5. It's important. I'll talk. And there's 200,000 young people currently out of work in Canada. That's a crisis. That's serious. But I'm not sure saying go work for nothing is the answer. I mean, when you say somebody works for nothing, who's feeding them? Where are they sleeping at night? And what you're saying to the mums and dads is subsidize these businesses. That's crazy. What we need to do is find jobs for these people. Maybe we need that guaranteed annual income we talked about, where the students get the $1,000 a month, if that's the figure we arrive at, and on top of that, there's an incentive then to take a low-paying job at McDonald's or one of these places for a minimum wage of $8 an hour, but with the $1,000 a month and $8 an hour, they live like citizens. And this idea of government, in my mind, increasing the gap between the rich and the poor, that you 200,000 folks work for nothing, and somehow you'll be subsidized by whoever subsidizes you, but it won't be us, and you'll be subsidizing McDonald's and other people. This is absolutely wrong. So anyway, we have a look this day about his comment about should workers be work for nothing, and there's arguments for that, on-job training and things like that, but it bothered me. And that ties into the next story over here, which is interesting, is the unemployment rates in the Eurozone, the 18 countries in the Eurozone. Spain right now, are you ready for this? 56% unemployment for young folks. In Spain, 23.7% unemployment. In Italy, 44% unemployment. I can tell you, folks, at about 28% unemployment, that's what happens with the Arab Spring. If these young people don't have a future, if they can't see any future, and days go by, months go by, years go by, and they're living like Pelosi says, work for nothing, they're not going to live with that. They're not going to. They're going to take to the streets. We're going to have more difficulties. And so again, it cries out for us to address this problem and nip it in the bud. So 13.5% in Canada is not good enough, but when we look at the European zone, it's explosive right now. Explosive. And so what are the solutions for that? What can we get going? You folks are going to be the decision makers. Tell us what we can do. Well, I don't take too much of your time today, but I think that pretty well covers what I wanted to say. There's lots of good stuff in there for discussions. I put these up on YouTube as well. Amazingly, we had a lot of interest the first time I put up. Several hundreds of people signed on just to watch the news that aren't members of the school. So that's fine. If it helps brand and spreads the word of our institution, let's do that. So it'll be up on the YouTube site this week as well. Have a look at it. Good, folks. Well, enjoy. I'll look for your assignments coming in, and I hope you're enjoying the course, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.